The year was coming to an end, and he did not know what to feel anymore. Every morning he woke up tired, even though he had slept for hours. His eyes were always heavy, and his mind never seemed calm. He lived in a small apartment in a noisy part of the city. Outside his window, cars and motorbikes moved constantly, and people talked loudly on the streets. He used to enjoy the energy of the city once, but now the noise felt like weight on his chest. He worked at an office that demanded long hours, endless reports, and constant meetings. His job was not bad, but it no longer felt meaningful. Every day he walked through the same hallway, greeted the same faces, sat at the same desk, and stared at the same computer screen. He tried to smile at everyone, but inside he was exhausted. He smiled because he did not want questions. He smiled because pretending was easier than explaining. The stress began slowly, like small drops of rain. He ignored it at first, thinking it was normal. Everyone is tired. Everyone works hard. Everyone feels pressure. But weeks turned into months, and the pressure did not fade. It grew heavier, like a storm that refused to pass. When he was younger, he dreamed of a peaceful life. He imagined waking up with excitement, being proud of his work, and going to sleep without worries. He imagined sitting with friends, laughing freely, feeling fresh air on his face, enjoying little things without thinking about responsibilities. But adulthood felt different. The world outside demanded too much, and his energy felt too little. He carried stress in his shoulders, in his back, and in his mind. Every night when he lay in bed, his thoughts refused to rest. He thought about deadlines, mistakes, things he wished he had done better. He thought about his future, unsure if he was on the right path. He thought about his goals, unsure if he still had any. Sleep came to him late, and even when he slept, his dreams carried work and stress inside them. Because of this, mornings were torture. The alarm clock would ring, and he would sit on the edge of his bed staring at the floor. Sometimes he wished the alarm had never rung at all. Sometimes he wished time would stop. He felt stuck in a routine that drained him day by day. He never told anyone how he felt. He believed everyone around him was busy with their own problems. His friends seemed happy. People online showed perfect lives. People at work spoke confidently about future plans. He looked at them and wondered why he could not feel the same. Was something wrong with him? Was he weaker than others? But deep inside, he knew the truth. He had forgotten how to rest. One evening after work, he came home feeling worse than usual. His head felt heavy, and his heart felt tight. Something inside him whispered that if he continued like this, something might break. He walked into the living room, dropped his bag on the sofa, and stared at the blank wall for a long time. The apartment lights were dim. The air was still, and the silence was strangely loud. He could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. He felt alone in a way that was deeper than being physically alone. He grabbed his phone, hoping distraction would help. He scrolled through videos, songs, ads, and news. Nothing felt interesting. He had lost excitement for everything he once enjoyed. Even eating was starting to feel like a job. He wondered if stress could change a person completely. He wondered how his mind had once been full of dreams, and now it was full of worry. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let out a long breath. The phone screen lit up again, and a music suggestion appeared on his feed. It was a playlist with classical music by Beethoven, Mozart, and Chopin. The title said something about helping stress and calming the mind. He stared at it for a moment. Classical music was not new to him, but he had never paid real attention to it. He clicked on it without much thought. At first, it was just soft sound in the background. He did not expect anything special from it. He placed the phone beside him and kept scrolling through random posts. Then something gentle happened. He noticed his shoulders relaxing. He noticed his breathing slowing down. The notes were soft and smooth, moving like calm waves on a lake. He listened more carefully. There was no loud beat, no sudden change, just peaceful movement. He lay on the sofa, looking up at the ceiling. For a long time he did not move. His mind felt lighter. It was surprising, because nothing in his life had changed in that moment, except the music. He did not know why. But the music reminded him of sunlight breaking through clouds. It reminded him of quiet mornings he used to enjoy. It reminded him of school days when he had no bills, no deadlines, no pressure. He opened his eyes and stared at the dim light on the ceiling. Something inside him wanted more of that peace. Something inside him felt a little alive again. He whispered to himself that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. The next day at work was stressful as usual. Papers were everywhere. Emails kept coming. Phones kept ringing. He sat at his desk, staring at the computer screen, wondering how many years of his life he would spend this way. At lunchtime, he ate alone. He watched other coworkers laughing together. He wondered how they found the energy. He wondered how they smiled so easily. He looked outside the office window. The sky was gray, and clouds moved slowly across it. For a moment, the world outside seemed quiet. Even though he knew it wasn't, that brief silence gave him comfort. When he went home, he played the same playlist again. Beethoven's slow piano piece filled the room. He sat near the window and listened. The music felt like a gentle hand resting on his heart. It was not dramatic. It was not magical. It was simply calming. He realized he had never allowed himself to sit and breathe without feeling guilty. He always thought resting was a waste of time. He believed he needed to keep going, keep pushing, keep working. But that night he learned something. He learned that rest was not laziness. Rest was survival. The next evening he returned to the playlist again, this time listening to Mozart. The rhythm was lighter, almost playful, yet incredibly peaceful. He felt the tension in his neck loosen. He noticed his thoughts start to slow down. Instead of thinking about work and future fears, he felt his mind drifting into a soft, quiet space. The music turned into a small escape, but not the kind that made him forget reality. It made reality feel less sharp. He wondered why music could affect him like this. He wondered if others felt the same. Maybe millions of people around the world sat just like him, listening to classical music because life was too heavy. Maybe he was not strange. Maybe he was not broken. Maybe he was simply human. Days passed, and the playlist became part of his evenings. He started lighting a small lamp near the window and letting the room stay dim. The music played softly, and he sat peacefully, without distraction. In those quiet moments, he began to notice things he had ignored for years. He noticed how the trees outside swayed gently in the wind. He noticed how the air smelled different at night. He noticed the warmth of his tea, the softness of his blanket, and the stillness of his apartment. He realized how he had rushed through life, ignoring beauty because stress had blinded him. He began thinking about the composers behind the music. He imagined Beethoven writing notes with great emotion. He imagined Mozart creating beautiful melodies filled with life. He imagined Chopin sitting at a piano, pouring feelings into every sound. Even though he knew little about classical music history, the names alone felt powerful. They made him feel connected to something bigger than his problems. Listening to those pieces gave him a sense of respect for human ability. If music from hundreds of years ago could reach him now, then maybe the world was kinder than he thought. Maybe the noise of modern life was not the whole truth. He realized something important. Stress had not come overnight. It had built slowly, and maybe healing would also be slow. But he did not mind that anymore. He was finally willing to give himself time. One night he sat near the window, cup of tea in hand, rain falling softly outside. Beethoven played gently in the background, and the rain added its own rhythm. He felt strangely safe. He closed his eyes and thought about his journey. He remembered childhood moments where he laughed freely. He remembered running on grass, hanging out with friends, eating ice cream without worrying about tomorrow. He remembered waking up excited for the day. He wondered when life had changed, when responsibility had taken away innocence, when pressure had replaced joy, but he did not feel sad about it anymore. He felt thankful that music was giving him back pieces of himself. Slowly, he started sleeping earlier. The soft piano notes became part of his night routine. They were the last thing he heard before closing his eyes. After a few days, he noticed he was waking up less tired. He noticed his heartbeat no longer felt fast all the time, his shoulders less tense, his mind less scared. Work was still stressful, but he reacted differently. Instead of panicking over every task, he took breaks. He took deep breaths. He reminded himself that he was trying his best. Something small inside him was changing. He even began looking forward to evenings again. Before, evenings were for worrying. Now evenings felt like healing. Classical music became the quiet company he never had. A safe place without pressure, noise, or judgment. One night he paused the music, and the silence felt strange. He realized how much he had depended on those sounds. But it was not a bad kind of dependence. It was like holding someone's hand while walking through darkness. He understood something important. He did not have to fight stress alone. He did not know where this new path would lead him. But for the first time in a long time, he felt hope. Hope not for a perfect life, but for a peaceful one. And that was enough for now. He had never thought much about music before. It had been a part of life. Background noise at parties, radio playing while he cleaned, or songs on the commute. But now, classical music felt different. It felt alive, as if it was speaking to him, even though there were no words. Each note carried a subtle weight, a gentle pull that reminded him of something he had lost long ago: peace of mind. That morning, he woke up feeling slightly lighter than usual. The sun had just started peeking through the window, painting the room with soft orange light. He poured himself a cup of tea and carried it to the small table near the window. The playlist was ready, waiting for him. He pressed play, and Mozart's soft piano melody filled the room. It was playful, yet calm, and it made him feel strangely curious. He noticed the small details in the music for the first time. The way the notes danced, the pauses between the phrases, the gentle rise and fall of the melody was all so precise, yet so free. For the first time in months, he was not thinking about work, deadlines, or his endless list of worries. His mind had finally found space to breathe. He stayed there for hours, sometimes closing his eyes, sometimes staring outside at the passing clouds. Each time a new piece began, he felt like he was meeting a new friend, someone who understood the chaos inside him. It was almost magical how music could reach the corners of his mind that words and people could not. He remembered the nights he had spent tossing and turning, thinking about things he could not change, worrying about things that might never happen. Those nights felt heavy, as though every thought was a stone pressing down on him. Now, with music, he could feel each stone lifting, floating away slowly, carried by invisible hands. The next day, he decided to do something different. He brought a notebook and pen to the table near the window. He wanted to capture the feelings music stirred inside him, to see them clearly. As Chopin's soft nocturnes played, he wrote freely, not worrying about grammar or style. Words flowed easily, as if the music guided them. He wrote about the way his shoulders felt lighter, the way his thoughts slowed down, and the small joys he had forgotten. Writing became a part of his routine. Every evening, he would play Beethoven in the background and let his pen move across the page. He wrote about memories, about dreams, about fears. Sometimes he wrote about nothing at all, just letting words fall wherever they wanted. The act of writing, combined with the music, made him feel connected to himself in a way he hadn't in years. He started noticing small changes in his daily life, too. Mornings no longer felt like punishment. Even small tasks like making breakfast or tidying up seemed lighter. His body, which had been tense for so long, began to relax. He could stretch without feeling pain, breathe deeply without noticing the tightness in his chest. At work, things did not magically get easier, but his approach began to shift. Instead of letting emails and tasks overwhelm him, he took small breaks, closing his eyes for a few minutes and imagining the calm music in his mind. He realized that stress had lost some of its power over him, not because his problems had disappeared, but because he had found a tool to manage them. He started reading about the composers behind the music. Beethoven's story was the first he encountered. A man who had struggled with deafness, yet created some of the most moving symphonies in history. He read about how Beethoven poured every feeling, every emotion into his music. The thought amazed him. If Beethoven could create beauty while facing immense personal challenges, maybe he too could find a way to navigate life with grace. Mozart's story followed, a child prodigy who faced constant financial struggles but continued to compose with joy and freedom. The way Mozart's music could lift spirits even centuries later fascinated him. Chopin came last, a man whose melodies carried deep emotion, sometimes sadness, sometimes hope. He learned how Chopin had suffered physically yet translated every feeling into music that could touch hearts long after his death. Each story added a new layer to his understanding of music. It was no longer just notes and rhythms. It was human experience, captured and shared across time. He felt connected to something bigger than himself, a network of emotion and creativity that transcended generations. As he listened and read, he began to experiment. Sometimes he closed his eyes and imagined himself walking through the streets of old Vienna, where Beethoven and Mozart once lived, letting the city's energy flow through him. Other times, he imagined sitting beside Chopin, watching him play the piano, feeling the care he poured into every note. These visualizations were small, private rituals, yet they made him feel alive. He noticed how his body and mind responded. His heart no longer felt like a drum racing against time. His shoulders released their habitual tension. Even when life's demands piled up, he could return to these moments of calm and feel safe. Music had become a sanctuary he could carry inside himself anywhere he went. Friends began to notice subtle changes too. He smiled more easily, spoke with more patience, and seemed less burdened. He did not explain why, and he did not need to. He realized that healing could be quiet and personal. Not everyone needed to understand. Some transformations were for oneself alone. One evening, after a particularly long and stressful day, he came home feeling drained. He wanted to lie down and shut out the world, but the playlist had become a habit, a ritual he could not skip. Beethoven's slow symphony began to play, and he settled into his usual spot near the window. For the first time, he allowed tears to fall without shame. They were not tears of sadness alone. They were relief, release, and recognition of the weight he had been carrying for so long. The music seemed to hold him gently. It's like a comforting hand on his shoulder. He thought about the months he had spent trapped in stress and routine, and how a few notes could now dissolve that tension. He wondered how he had never noticed music's power before. That night, he made a quiet decision. He would learn more about music, not to become a musician, but to understand it, to let it guide him. He searched online for more pieces, more composers, and even small lessons in music theory. He wanted to know why certain chords made him feel calm and why certain melodies lifted his spirit. The deeper he delved, the more he realized that classical music was a language of emotion. It spoke directly to the heart, bypassing the clutter of the mind. Stress, worry, and fear lost their dominance when he allowed the music to take over for a while. It was a gentle form of meditation, a tool for clarity and presence. He began sharing this discovery quietly with a few close friends. Not as a lecture, not as advice, but as an invitation. "Try this," he would say, passing a playlist link. Most friends were skeptical, but a few tried it and reported feeling calmer, less restless. That small exchange gave him hope that music could reach others as it had reached him. One afternoon, decided to take a walk with headphones in. Chopin's nocturnes played softly as he walked through the park near his apartment. The wind brushed against his face, leaves rustled underfoot, and birds sang from a distance. Normally, these sights and sounds would have barely registered, but combined with music, the world seemed more vivid. Every color was brighter, every sound more layered. Even strangers passing by seemed part of a larger, peaceful rhythm. He realized that his perspective had shifted. He no longer felt trapped by life's demands. He felt part of a flow, a quiet rhythm that existed regardless of chaos. Music had taught him patience, presence, perspective. He remembered how heavy his mornings used to feel, how hard it was to rise from bed. Now, even stressful days did not crush him completely. The small ritual of music, tea, and reflection had anchored him. He was learning that calm did not mean avoidance. It meant balance. He began keeping a small journal, writing not only about thoughts and feelings, but also about music itself. He noted which pieces made him feel calm, which lifted his spirits, and which allowed him to reflect deeply. Over time, he noticed patterns in his moods, linked to the music he listened to. This awareness helped him understand himself better. Weeks turned into months, and the practice became second nature. Classical music was no longer background noise. It was a companion, a teacher, and a healer. Life's problems still existed, but their weight had lessened. He faced them with more clarity, more patience, and more resilience. He thought about how strange it was that something so simple, a playlist of old music, could change his days so profoundly. It was not cruel. It did not erase bills, deadlines, or responsibilities, but it gave him the strength to face them without being crushed by them. On quiet nights, he would sit near the window, listening to Chopin, looking at the stars, and feeling a sense of calm he had not known since childhood. For the first time in years, he felt like himself again, not the stressed, burdened adult, but a human being capable of peace, reflection, and joy. In these moments, he realized a truth that had been buried under stress. Healing does not always come from solving problems. Sometimes it comes from finding a small space of calm, a practice that allows the mind and heart to rest. Music had become that space for him. And so, life continued. Work remained demanding. Responsibilities remained constant. Yet he walked through each day with a quiet companion in his mind, a rhythm that reminded him to breathe, to notice, to be present. Beethoven, Mozart, and Chopin were no longer just names. They were guides, helping him navigate a world that once felt overwhelming. For the first time, he looked forward to evenings. He looked forward to listening, reflecting, and simply being. And in that quiet anticipation, he discovered a small but profound truth. Peace is not something to wait for. It is something to create, one note, one breath, one moment at a time. Over the weeks, he began to notice a shift inside himself. Music was no longer just a distraction or a way to escape for a few minutes. It had become a part of his daily life, a quiet companion that shaped his routine. The change was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew steadily. Like a small seed pushing through the soil, reaching for sunlight, he started mornings differently now. Instead of rushing out of bed and immediately thinking about emails or deadlines, he allowed himself 5 minutes to breathe. He would sit by the window with a warm cup of tea, watching the sun stretch across the sky, letting the gentle notes of Beethoven fill the room. The rhythm of the music guided his heartbeat, slowing it, reminding him that the day had only just begun, and that it did not need to be a battle from the first second. Even small tasks began to feel lighter. Washing the dishes, tidying the apartment, making breakfast, all of these routines that once felt like burdens became moments of quiet reflection. He noticed the texture of the tea mug in his hands, the steam rising gently, the soft hum of the city outside. The music made him aware of the present, something he had long forgotten in his rush through life. He realized that he had spent so long trying to control everything around him that he had forgotten to control the space within himself. Music gave him that control, a quiet space where he could choose his thoughts, let go of tension, and simply exist without guilt or pressure. At work, he started taking small pauses, mindful moments where he would close his eyes and imagine the music surrounding him. He found that even a few minutes of imagining the melodies helped him return to tasks with more clarity. Problems that had seemed insurmountable earlier now appeared manageable. His colleagues began to notice a subtle difference in his demeanor. He spoke with more patience, smiled more often, and seemed less burdened by the endless pressure. After work, he began experimenting with new routines. He would walk through the park near his apartment, headphones on, letting Chopin's nocturnes play softly. The world outside seemed transformed. The wind through the trees, the distant chatter of people, the birds singing, all of it combined with the music to create a small world of peace that belonged to him alone. The rhythm of the music guided his steps, made him more aware of his surroundings, and reminded him that beauty still existed, even in ordinary places. He also started journaling more consistently. Each evening, As the sun dipped below the horizon, he would sit at his small table with a cup of tea and a notebook. He wrote about his day, about the music, and about the small moments he had noticed. Sometimes he wrote about nothing at all, just letting the pen move freely. The act of writing became a dialogue with himself, a way to understand his thoughts and emotions without judgment. He began to notice patterns in how he felt. Some pieces lifted his mood instantly. Others made him reflective, almost melancholic, yet in a comforting way. He realized that classical music was more than sound, it was a mirror of emotion, a guide through feelings he had long ignored or suppressed. Beethoven's symphonies often reminded him of strength and resilience. Mozart's lighter pieces brought joy and playfulness, and Chopin's nocturnes invited introspection and acceptance. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, he sat by the window and let the music play. The city outside was noisy as usual, but the music created a bubble around him, a private world where he could breathe. He thought about the people he had seen that days him happy, some stressed, some indifferent. He realized that everyone carried their own burdens, just as he did. The music allowed him to feel empathy without being overwhelmed, to understand the human experience without being trapped by it. He began exploring more about the composers themselves. Beethoven had faced deafness, yet he poured every ounce of emotion into his music. Mozart had struggled with financial difficulties, yet his melodies were full of life and energy. Chopin had suffered physically, but created music that spoke of both sorrow and hope. Their stories gave him perspective. He understood that suffering did not mean the end of creativity or joy. It could be transformed into beauty. Inspired by this, he started to integrate small rituals into his daily life. In the mornings, he would let Beethoven play while preparing tea. During work breaks, he would listen to Mozart, allowing light, playful melodies to refresh his mind. In the evenings, he would sit quietly with Chopin, reflecting on the day and releasing tension. These rituals were not rigid, but they became anchors, small moments of stability in an otherwise unpredictable life. He noticed how his reactions to stress were changing. Where he once would have panicked over an email or felt frustrated by a missed deadline, he now paused, took a deep breath, and allowed himself a moment of calm. The music reminded him that not every battle needed to be fought immediately, that some things could wait, and that his mental and emotional well-being mattered more than small victories. Walking in the park became a meditation. He paid attention to each step, to the sounds of the world around him, and to the way the music moved through his mind. He noticed that he smiled more easily at strangers, that he greeted people with warmth, that he felt a connection to the world that had long been missing. Music had given him a sense of presence that words alone could not. He also began to notice the way his body responded. Tension in his shoulders and back started to fade. He could stretch without discomfort. Breathing felt easier. His heartbeat, once quick and anxious, now slowed naturally in moments of calm. The music had become more than sound. It was therapy. It's a way to recalibrate his body and mind. Sometimes he would sit with headphones in, closing his eyes and imagining himself in different places. He pictured walking through a quiet forest, feeling leaves crunch beneath his feet and letting the music guide his steps. Other times he imagined sitting in a grand concert hall watching the musicians play with passion and precision. These mental exercises, combined with the music, made him feel both relaxed and alive. He started to realize that music had taught him patience. Where he once expected immediate results from effort, he now understood that change takes time. The slow, deliberate development of a symphony mirrored the slow development of his own life. Each note, each pause, each crescendo was a reminder that growth was a process, not a race. He also became aware of how his perception of stress had changed. Stress had not disappeared, but it no longer controlled him. He had learned to recognize it, to step back, and to respond rather than react. Music had given him a tool to navigate difficult emotions, to find calm amidst chaos, to connect with the deeper rhythms of life. One quiet evening, he decided to experiment further. He combined music with other simple practices. He lit a candle, poured a cup of tea, and sat in a comfortable chair. Beethoven played softly in the background, and he allowed himself to focus on each breath, each note, each sensation. The combination of mindfulness and music created a profound sense of peace. He realized that he could carry this calm within him. Even when life became noisy and demanding, he began to notice small changes in his relationships as well. Conversations with friends felt more meaningful. He listened more attentively, spoke more patiently, and shared moments of joy and reflection. He no longer felt the constant need to rush, to control, or to fix. The music had taught him that presence, attentiveness, calm could transform interactions without effort. Reading about composers became a daily habit. He marveled at how Beethoven composed masterpieces despite deafness, how Mozart created joyful music even in financial hardship, and how Chopin transformed personal pain into melodies that moved generations. Their resilience inspired him. He understood that life's challenges did not define him. His response to them did. He began to experiment with creating his own small compositions, not to perform or share, but as a personal exercise. He hummed melodies, tapped rhythms on his desk, and allowed his imagination to move freely. It was not music meant for others. It was music meant for himself, a private expression of emotion and discovery. Through all this, he realized that healing is not a single event. It is a series of small steps, repeated over time. Music had become the guiding force in these steps, a constant reminder that peace, clarity, and joy could be cultivated with intention and care. Even when life was difficult, he felt an underlying stability. He faced challenges at work, personal frustrations, and the everyday struggles of living, but he did not crumble under their weight. The music had given him resilience, a quiet strength that he could call upon any time. He noticed how much his appreciation for life had grown. Simple things, the warmth of the sun, the sound of leaves rustling, the taste of tea felt more vivid, more alive. He understood that happiness was not a distant destination. It was available in small, mindful moments. Music had taught him to notice these moments, to savor them, to let them fill his heart. One evening, after a long day, he sat near the window with Chopin's nocturnes playing softly. He closed his eyes and let the notes carry him away. He reflected on the journey he had taken so far, from exhaustion and stress to this quiet sense of peace. He smiled, realizing that he had found a companion in music, a guide that would continue to support him. Through life's ups and downs, he understood that life would never be without challenges, but he now had tools to navigate them. The music had not erased problems. It had transformed his relationship with them. Stress no longer felt like a crushing weight. It was a wave he could ride, knowing that calm and clarity were always within reach. With every passing day, the routines he had established became more natural, more integrated into his life. He no longer needed to consciously remind himself to listen or reflect. It had become second nature. Music had woven itself into the fabric of his existence, a constant thread of calm, beauty, and understanding. He realized that this journey was ongoing. There would always be moments of tension, fatigue, and uncertainty. But now he faced them with awareness, intention, and a sense of connection. Music had given him a way to honor his emotions, to release tension, and to find balance, even in the most ordinary moments. For the first time in years, he felt that he could navigate life fully present, aware of both the challenges and the beauty that existed within it. He understood that music was more than entertainment. It was a lifeline, a teacher, and a source of quiet strength that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Life had begun to feel different. It wasn't that the world had changed or that stress had disappeared, but he had changed. He had learned to notice it, to recognize it, and to let it pass instead of letting it control him. Music had become more than background sound. It had become a guide, a teacher, and a companion through his daily life. Each note seemed to carry a subtle lesson about patience, presence, and resilience. One morning, he woke up earlier than usual, feeling light and clear-headed. The city outside was quiet, a rare moment before the usual chaos of traffic and people began. He made a cup of tea and carried it to the small table near the window. Beethoven's soft symphony played in the background, its notes spreading gently across the room. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in slowly. Felt a deep calm that had been absent for so long. the calm stayed with him as he moved through his morning routine. He noticed the sunlight on his hands, the warmth of the mug, and even the faint smell of the paper on his desk. These small details, which had once gone unnoticed, now seemed vivid and important. He realized that he had spent so many years rushing through life without truly experiencing it. Music had opened a door to awareness that he had long ignored. At work, he approached his tasks differently. Instead of rushing or worrying constantly about deadlines, he took small pauses to breathe, to visualize calm, or to recall the melodies that had filled his mornings. He found that he could think more clearly, solve problems more effectively, and interact with colleagues more patiently. Stress still existed, but it no longer dominated his thoughts or actions. He began to notice how music affected his emotions in subtle ways. A certain Mozart piece would make him feel light, playful, almost carefree. Beethoven's symphonies gave him strength when he felt weak or overwhelmed. Chopin's nocturnes helped him process sadness or reflection without feeling trapped by it. He realized that he could now use music intentionally, choosing melodies that matched his needs and emotions at different moments of the day. One afternoon, after a particularly long meeting, he felt the familiar tension creeping in. Instead of letting it take over, he stepped outside for a brief walk. The wind was soft against his face, and he could hear distant city sounds. He pressed play on his headphones and let Chopin's nocturne fill his ears. He focused on the music, letting it guide his breath, his pace, and his thoughts. By the time he returned to his office, the tension had eased, replaced by clarity and calm. He also began experimenting with other small changes in his life. He started journaling more regularly, not just about stress or work, but about what he observed, what he felt, and what inspired him. Writing became a way to capture the subtle shifts in his emotions and thoughts. It's a record of growth that reminded him of how far he had come. He wrote about the music, about the moments of peace, about the lessons he learned from composers who had lived centuries ago, yet spoke to him so clearly in the present. Learning about Beethoven, Mozart, and Chopin became a source of inspiration. Beethoven had faced incredible hardship, losing his hearing, yet continuing to compose masterpieces that touched the world. Mozart had navigated financial struggles but continued to fill life with joy and creativity. Chopin had transformed personal pain into music that spoke of sorrow, hope, and beauty. Their lives reminded him that resilience and creativity could flourish even in the face of challenges. One evening, as Chopin's soft melodies played, he reflected on his own life. He realized how often he had focused on what he lacked, on the problems that seemed endless. Now, he could focus on what he could create, what he could experience, and what he could nurture. The change was not instant, but it was real. It came from the consistent practice of listening, reflecting, and allowing himself to feel. He began to notice how his perspective on challenges had shifted. A problem at work no longer felt like a mountain. A difficult conversation with a colleague or a friend no longer felt like a battlefield. Music had taught him patience, allowing him to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. It had given him a sense of presence that allowed him to navigate life more skillfully. As the days passed, he found himself more aware of the beauty around him. He noticed the subtle colors in the sky during sunrise, the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind, the sound of distant laughter. These small details, which had once gone unnoticed, now felt significant. Music had opened his eyes to the richness of the present moment, showing him that life was not only about work, responsibilities, or stress, but also about experiencing and appreciating the world as it is. He also began sharing his experiences quietly with a few friends. He did not insist or preach. He simply offered them a playlist, hoping they might discover the same calm he had. Some tried it hesitantly, but a few returned to him later, expressing surprise at how the music had helped them feel lighter, more focused, or simply more at peace. These small connections reinforced his understanding that healing and awareness could ripple outward, touching others without force or expectation. One day, he experimented with combining music with meditation. He would sit in a quiet corner, close his eyes, and let the melodies guide his attention to his breath, his heartbeat, and the sensations in his body. He discovered that music could deepen the experience of mindfulness, making it easier to remain present and fully aware. Stress and anxiety became softer, more manageable. As he learned to respond rather than resist, he also began to notice changes in his self-talk. Previously, his inner voice had been harsh, critical, and impatient. Now, influenced by the calm and clarity music brought, he could speak to himself more gently. He acknowledged mistakes without judgment, encouraged himself when tasks felt difficult, and reminded himself that growth takes time. Music had not only transformed his environment and routines, but it had also transformed the way he related to himself. Evenings became sacred moments. After dinner, he would dim the lights, make a cup of tea, and sit near the window. Beethoven would start softly in the background, followed by Mozart and Chopin. Sometimes he would write, sometimes he would simply sit and watch the world outside. These moments were not about escaping reality, but about creating a space where he could reconnect with himself and regain perspective. He began noticing a deeper sense of gratitude emerging. The simple act of listening to music and observing his surroundings made him aware of the richness in everyday life. He felt grateful for the small comforts he had once taken for granted, the warmth of a cup of tea, the softness of a blanket, the quiet moments of reflection. Gratitude became a natural companion to the calm music that now filled his life. With time, he started integrating physical activity with music. He would take walks in the park, letting the melodies move with his steps. He noticed that he walked more mindfully, paying attention to each movement, each sound, each sensation. Music made even exercise feel gentle and restorative, not a chore. He also began to notice changes in his emotional resilience. Difficult situations that once triggered anxiety or frustration now elicited thoughtful responses. He could pause, breathe, and approach challenges with a sense of calm confidence. Music had taught him to ride the waves of emotion rather than being pulled under by them.